Welcome to the Debt Crisis Problem Podcast, your source for insights into major risk events that could trigger an economic downturn and debt crisis. Today, we're addressing another key risk, consumer debt and spending. Our goal is to create risk awareness and spark a healthy debate for the average citizen. The world is too fragile to wait. We need fresh candor and common sense. A debt crisis looms due to unsustainable debt and deficit spending everywhere. It's time to wake up and speak up. Let's get started. Rock-solid core values. Go back in time for a moment. A few generations ago, our recent ancestors had a set of core values that should be the envy of the world. They were good people, honest, hardworking, frugal, used budgets, watched out for their neighbor. They avoided debt, and if they did borrow, the loans were very modest and were repaid in short order. They sacrificed and went without, rather than use credit cards. They lived within their means, usually on one income in the household. They were sincere and held themselves to account and expected that others do the same too. They respected themselves and each other. They were exceptionally decent people, with their courteous public manners on full display all the time. Spoiled generations. Today, generations later, we have become less disciplined, more selfish, and have a plastic buy it now, pay it later attitude. We've developed a covetousness desire for more wealth and possessions, especially for automobiles and larger homes. With that came large installment and mortgage debts, and a more and a me and myself, mine mindset set in. Honestly, I think the earlier generation would see what we do today and shake their heads in disbelief. Who avoids debt today, is frugal, and saves money by living on less than less than their means would otherwise allow? In the end, we love debt, don't we? We want stuff, even if it puts us in bondage. We want things so badly that we are willing to enslave our budgets for years on end. Carefully pay close attention to the next TV ad from a lending institution offering money via a home equity loan. You'll see a small family getting into a new car or towing a new boat with all the fun and excitement. Or a handsome couple sitting on a beautiful beach, sunset and all. After all, what is the big deal of just another $300 a month, right? But debt loads can quickly become unsustainable, and the new home equity loan and all the fun and excitement is really nothing more than a steel ball and chain that has enslaved the family for the next 20 years. They also risk losing their home for non-payment if something happens. Consumer debt levels keep rising to record heights year over year. Because of the nation's addiction to debt, it is no wonder elected politicians just keep raising the debt ceiling. We are literally living off debt. Frankly, people are comfortably asleep on that debt express plane, flying faster with a mountainside coming into greater focus each day. Nothing like living off a giant credit card. And mortgage debts are out of control. To illustrate this point, simply look back to 2000 when mortgage debt was $7 trillion. And just $4 trillion in 10 years earlier in 1990. Today, mortgage debt is estimated to be more than $20 trillion. Similarly, total personal debt, which includes mortgages, increased from $9 trillion in 2000 to $25 trillion in 2024, expected to increase to $28 trillion in the next few years. Any chance of defaults and asset bubble collapses when the next serious economic downturn comes? Of course, the markets will make more accommodations to keep the musical chair game going. Would it surprise anyone to see not 30, but 40, 50, 60, or even 100-year mortgages? Shocking to you? Don't be surprised to see it commonplace to have mortgages with no expectation of ever being fully repaid in your lifetime. Talk about bondage. If you have a mortgage, depending on where you live, your ownership interest is essentially being held in trust by a trustee. The trustee is empowered to remove your ownership interest for non-payment. You don't own it, really, and never will until the mortgage is paid in full. Don't be surprised that renting becomes the new norm for all your fixed assets. It wouldn't be surprising to see real estate investment trusts, like giant landlords, gobble up more and more real estate assets, collect rents from all those tenants out there, and make their shareholders very wealthy. Stick to modest debt levels. Consumers, the collective you, have literally been living off a mountain of debt. Why do I feel this way? In the first place, long-term debts should have been maintained at modest levels and be limited to just mortgage debt and possibly education debt. Insatiable appetite for more things, bigger houses, cars, vacations, furnishings, has tossed the principle of modesty out the window and has saddled most people with as much debt as they can carry. The heavy load often requires the support of two incomes, right? And in way too many cases, stress levels are way over the top. You know what I mean. The lighter debt burdens can become heavy overnight when that key job is lost, or someone gets sick, and so on. That's why debt levels need to be modest. What is a modest debt level anyway? You define what modest means, or should mean, to you or the average person. Modest debt levels are generally very manageable. Such levels leave room for emergencies, downturns, unexpected disruptions, layoffs, and so forth. What we have today is excessive, not modest, debt levels. Credit cards should be paid off each month, but they now total about $1.3 trillion in outstanding balances, likely at high interest rates. Credit card debt is being used more often as personal savings are depleted. Delinquency rates are rising too. Talk about bondage. When I think of modest debt or modest rent, I'm thinking of what might be the average price for a given rental market and apply it to a mortgage payment amount. And is that even possible today? No, it is likely not. Which underscores how out of balance the markets are, how unsustainably high asset prices are. Think bubble prices. Use one income as the standard for rent and mortgage payment amounts. So, you do what you've got to do, right? But be sure to do it with your eyes open wide and be prepared to step up to the plate and repay your debts. As you do your budget, if your gut says it's too much debt or payment, then look for something else. While much of the $25 trillion in personal debt levels is tied to mortgages, that is still an alarming amount of debt when adding in installment loans and so forth. Nowadays, if you take two incomes, it can take two incomes to just make the mortgage payment. You're much better off, if you must pay a higher mortgage payment, to have it calculated on just one income, not two. Otherwise, just rent and be thankful. In a down economy, unemployment increases, and it's not that easy to make the hefty mortgage payments without a regular good job. Spending like this cannot and will not continue forever without substantially breaking down at some point, for a host of reasons. So where will you end up? What if the big credit card limit is not increased? Think carefully about borrowing levels. Consumer spend is the main engine running the U.S. economy, and there is every indication it is running out of savings, utilizing credit card debt more than ever before, and repayment delinquencies are on the rise. Read any financial report these days. It is there everywhere. Interest rates are high, as are prices. When people start financing day-to-day living expenses, that is serious. Younger people, those with student loans and auto loans, are likely to have credit card debt too. How long will it be before this market segment defaults on its debt in large numbers? There's even a new unregulated debt option called Buy Now, Pay Later, or BNPL funding, where purchases are repaid interest-free over a few payments. The debt isn't being reported to any credit reporting agencies, so no one really knows how much debt a person really has. And talk about a temptation to get into more debt, too. After all, it's cheaper than having a 20% credit card, right? Is it really worth it? And what will that lead to next? Will this cascade into other mortgage debt sectors too, creating increased credit risk there? Mortgage debt is interesting when you take a close look at it. In the past 20 years, mortgages that should have been paid down are being refinanced over and over, and in many cases the homeowner owes substantially more than the original mortgage. 10 years later, if the mortgage amount has increased by $80,000, that equates to $8,000 per year, or $667 every month in additional debt spending for 10 years. One really should have asked themselves if being in bondage for up to another 30 years paying $667 a month, basically forever, was worth whatever they bought with it. In earlier generations, the answer would have been a definite no. What's the risk of default for 30 more years? When widespread defaults begin, other issues arise like credit freezes. Ask how local, city, state, and even the U.S. government will ultimately collect more taxes from its citizens if they are in default and restructuring mode of their debts. Would it not impact the collection of sufficient tax revenues to avoid default too? So, who will bail out the U.S. government? We will look back and question if such debt-funded expenditures were really worth it. The answer will be an obvious no. People are playing with Mother Nature, so to speak. Don't get caught in a supercell storm. I'm going to share with you 4 articles. I'm calling them yellow or red flags. And I think they're important to consider at this point. First one is entitled, Credit Card Debt Hits a Staggering $1.13 trillion. Here's Why So Many Americans Are Under Pressure, by Jessica Dickler, February 2024. Quote, Americans now owe a collective $1.13 trillion on their credit cards, according to a new report on household debt from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Credit card balances increased by $50 billion, or roughly 5% in the fourth quarter of 2023, the New York Fed found. Credit card delinquency rates also jumped, particularly among younger millennials, or borrowers between the ages of 30 and 39, who are burdened by high levels of student debt. This signals increased financial stress, especially among younger and lower-income households, said Wilbert Vanderklaw, economic research advisor at the New York Fed. Why so many Americans are under pressure? Even though the economy overall is doing great, there are pockets out there where people are overextended, the New York Fed researcher said in a press call Tuesday. Many consumers feel strained by higher prices, most notably for food, gas, and housing, and more cardholders are carrying debt from month to month or falling behind on payments, according to a separate report from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Why workers' raises are smaller in 2024? Nearly 1/10 of credit card users find themselves in persistent debt, where they are charged more in interest and fees each year than they pay towards the principal, a pattern that is increasingly difficult to break, the Consumer Watchdog said. Continues, credit card rates topped 20%. Credit card rates were already high but spiked along with the Federal Reserve's string of 11 rate hikes, including 4 in 2023. Since most credit cards have a variable rate, there's a direct connection to the Fed's benchmark. As the Fed funds rate rose, the prime rate did as well, and credit card rates followed suit. The average annual percentage rate is now more than 20%, which also an all-time high. This small ad is sponsored by the TunaBudget.com podcast. Hey friends, looking to improve your personal and family financial wellness? Don't miss the Tuna Budget podcasts at TunaBudget.com. Download your free Tuna Budget Worksheet Plan, the most powerful budget worksheet plan in the world, yours. In addition, dozens of Tuna Budget's human-side candid conversation memos may be the perfect answers you're looking for. Join us for real candid conversations and candid questions that can change your life for the better. Subscribe to the TunaBudget.com podcasts and empower yourself to take charge of your future and financial well-being. How about another red flag? Let's talk about Americans still splurging on travel and entertainment, even as credit card debt tops $1 trillion. This was put out by Jessica Dickler in April of 2024. It says, young adults especially are focused on enjoying life in the moment rather than saving for the future, the reports show. It's partly that you only live once mentality that intensified during the pandemic, one expert said. Revenge spending is not dead. Even as Americans owe $1.13 trillion on their credit cards, consumers are still willing to splurge on impulsive purchases. It's a phenomenon also known as doom spending, or spending money despite economic and geopolitical concerns. Roughly 38% of adults plan to take on more debt to travel, dine out, and see live entertainment in the year ahead, according to a recent report by Bankrate. 1/4 or 27% of those surveyed said they would go into debt to travel this year, while 14% would dip into the red to dine out, and another 13% would lean on credit to go to the theater, see a live sporting event, or attend a concert. There's still a lot of demand for out-of-the-home entertainment. Some of that reflects a you only live once mentality that intensified during the pandemic, and some of that is because many economic indicators, including GDP growth and the unemployment rate, are in favorable shape. Younger adults, particularly Generation X and Millennials, were more likely to splurge on those discretionary purchases. Although an increased cost of living has made it particularly hard for those just starting out, young adults are taking a more relaxed approach to their long-term financial security. Rather than cut expenses to boost savings, 73% of Gen Xers between the age of 18 and 25 say they would rather have a better quality of life than extra money in the bank. Gen Xers are also the biggest cohort of non-savers. It's hard to overstate the impact of the pandemic. It changed the way so many people view their spending, and the result of that is that people are more focused on the right now than thinking about 40 years from now. Very interesting. Oh, it continues. However, that will have repercussions later on. When it comes to saving for long-term goals, young adults risk forfeiting the significant advantage of time. Every dollar you set aside in your 20s will compound over time. The earlier you start, the more you will benefit from compound interest, whereby the money you get gets reinvested and earns even more. At the very least, strike a balance. Automate a portion of your income towards saving and build up some fun into the budget. At least then you're not paying 20% credit card interest. Here's another yellow or red flag. This was by Ryan DeRusso in September of 2021. I thought it was interesting, even though it's dated. Painful debt, how credit cards can hurt your health. It says, it's easy to quantify the pain that high levels of debt can cause to one's finances by either looking at the opportunity cost or the squeeze on the ability to pay day-to-day expenses. But causing pain to the actual body? According to new research, the ache that you may feel or the stiffness after work may also relate to the amount of debt you have. Researchers evaluated baby boomers as they age, starting from 28 to 40, and then checked them again at 50 years old. They separated the group into levels of unsecured debt, like the debt you take on by owning a credit card or taking out payday loans. The results found a significantly higher rate of physical pain among those with high unsecured debt when compared to those without debt. The findings follow a long line of research that links those with higher debt loads, less stable finances, and reduced financial options with having poorer health as they age. The current research, however, provides a link between physical pain and debt, which can continue long after one pays back the loan. The researchers evaluated 7,850 people within the baby boomer age group who responded to the 1979 National Longitudinal Study of Youth, finding the reported debt levels for those from 28 to 40 at the time. They then evaluated the same group based on the amount of reported pain they felt from work or in general at age 50 through the study. Interesting. They discovered that those with consistently high debt had a 76% greater chance to report pain in their daily life when compared with those without debt. The pain presented even in cases where the high debt group had taken steps to reduce the debt levels, with a reported 50% higher likelihood of feeling pain in the cohort. Both debt and chronic pain can accumulate over time, so this cycle is hard to reverse once it starts. Interesting. Why does the level of debt have so much a compounding impact on health? The reasons vary, but typically boil down to three causes. First, if you have a high debt load, then you have fewer resources to commit to areas of your life that would ease your pain or prevent illness, like preventative medicine or even basic health care. Over time, this lack of focus on your well-being results in poorer health, particularly as you age. Second, having high levels of debt can cause stress. To wit, high levels of stress can result in higher levels of debt. The two sides of the coin can battle against each other, resulting in more stress, more debt, and poorer health. It's also worth noting that health can play a role in this cycle as well. Poor health, when young, can result in higher debt, which can lead to more stress and worsened health as one ages. And finally, often anxiety over the repayment of debt can compound over time, which eventually presents itself by taking its toll on your health. Pain also often becomes more acute as one ages. The ongoing stress one experiences when stuck in a debt cycle takes time to appear and impact health. When it does, it can result in heightened levels of pain, according to the research, which can prevent someone from working or making the day job more difficult to bear. Despite the lingering impact of credit card debt, for those with a large balance, getting rid of the liability gives you the best chance to better your future health and improves the chance of to achieve financial independence. Wow, who would have ever known? And the last red or yellow flag. This is Principal Economist at the Conference Board, Eric Lund, 11 of 2023. He says, headwinds are going to eventually force the consumer to buckle, and I think we're going to see consumers have to pull back on spending for a quarter or two. Additionally, as the pandemic waned, consumers unleash a pent-up demand for experiences denied by COVID. The consumer is going to have to take a breather for a little bit, and that would mean Americans are maybe forced to finally pull back on their post-COVID spending spree. At a certain point, this debt becomes unsustainable, and there's no more savings left. And that's what we expect probably to happen to the U.S. consumer towards the end of this year and into early 2024. Well, obviously, nothing's improved since the early 2024. So, in conclusion, so what, when, and how does the consumer's debt and spend affect you? Well, yesterday's core values are all but gone. Sadly, the core moral values of our ancestors just a few generations ago have all but disappeared with them. They were honest, hard-working, frugal, used budgets, watched out for their neighbor. They avoided debt, and if they did borrow, the loans were very modest and were repaid in short order. They sacrificed and went without rather than use credit cards at all. They lived within their means, used budgets, and a lifestyle usually on one income in the household. Today, generations later, we have become less disciplined, more selfish, and have a plastic buy it now, pay it later attitude. We have developed a covetous desire for more wealth and possessions, especially for automobiles and larger homes. With that came larger installment and mortgage debts, and a more and more and a me, mine, myself, and my mindset set in. So think of a modest mortgage. In 2000, mortgage debt totaled $7 trillion and just $4 trillion 10 years earlier in 1990. Today, mortgage debt is $19 trillion, a 271% increase in just 23 years. Similarly, total personal debt, which includes mortgages, increased from $8 trillion in 2000 to $25 trillion in 2023, a 313% increase, expected to increase to $27 trillion in the next few years. People ask what they should do or how to make any sense of this mortgage dilemma. The answer? Think modest. A modest home in its size to start with. If there be any amount of household debt, limit it to a mortgage and maybe some for educational purposes, maybe. The rest? Pay with cash or don't do it. To get a modest mortgage payment amount, compare it to the average market rent for an average size property and base the mortgage on one income in the household, or just rent. Calculating a modest standard of living to survive the day. Do this by calculating a mortgage payment like the average rent payment. This is one way to determine a modest payment and level of debt. If you need to go bigger, buy a modest house and base the underwriting or repayment capacity on just one income, assuming there are two incomes in the household. If it still does not work, rent something modest that the one income will reasonably afford. Being in overwhelming debt is just not worth the risk. Life happens, and having peace of mind at the end of the day is way better than suffering through what can become an unbearable debt burden situation. Resolve to not increase the mortgage amount through a cash-out refinance. Think it through first. Because it's not likely worth the pain or the exposure down the road. It's surprising to see how much people still owe in their homes after living in them for 10 or maybe even 20 years. Many have refinanced and owe tens of thousands of dollars more than when they first moved in. Be careful, you're no match for a supercell storm. More voices are finally sounding the alarm and waving yellow and red flags, so be very careful. Supercell storms will be coming. The world's sky will be changing rapidly, and over the next couple of years, shock events will likely and severely impact the U.S. economy and you. The consumer has too much debt and continues to borrow more and more. As events transpire, debt loads will become overwhelmingly burdensome. Even normal levels of debt can become a heavy debt burden when income is reduced for whatever reason. Like a tornado dropping out of the sky, it can hit any parent, house or spouse, family, business owner, town, city, state, or country. Best prepare while the sun is shining. Can you smell a debt crisis yet? Thank you for joining us. Today we explored consumer debt and spending, a major risk contributing to the looming debt crisis. We hope to highlight the urgent need for transparency around these risks. We want to hear from you too. Submit your own debt crisis memo and share your thoughts at tunabudget.com. If you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe for future podcasts. Your support helps us grow this healthy debate. Until next time, take all the necessary precautions. Your financial wellness matters. Thanks again.